Talking about the great power, new model of great power relationship, I think this is only a goodwill or good intention. It's not a policy, not even as yesterday Kevin mentioned the organizing principle yet. In fact, both Chinese leader Xi Jinping has posed and U.S. leader Obama has accepted this goodwill. But only have goodwill cannot build the great power, a good model, new model of great power relationship. We have to find a realistic, come back to the very basics, realistic balanced power approach in order to ensure the competition is peaceful. So my paper is divided into 4 parts. First is about the concept. What is the concept of new model of great power relationship? Second, in the context of U.S. strategic rebalance, what kind of competition U.S.-China has come to? Third, is U.S. in a position to contain China in the Pacific? My answer is no, of course. Finally, the 4th part is what is the realistic approach to build a great power relationship? I hope I have time to complete them. Stop me any time during the process. First, the concept of new model of great power relationship. I think it's a reflection of China's own confirmation of China's rising power status in relationship with U.S. From that perspective, from that position, China expressed its goodwill or good intention. For many years, from a vulnerable geopolitical position, China has tried to avoid confrontation with the U.S. In Professor Jia Qingguo's article published in my journal many years ago, China tried to learning to live with hegemon. In other words, try to adapt to the reality of the world dominated by the U.S., making accommodations to the U.S. However, China's position has been changed. The rising power of China has been gradually not only recognized by the other powers, but also by China itself, especially during the financial crisis, 2008, 2009. China weathered the crisis better than the US and other countries. Many people in China has become a little bit patient in the U.S. push upon China on many more China called core national interests. And in that context, China's behavior, to a certain extent, toward U.S. has been changed. But Chinese leaders, in my view, has been more or less realistic or rational. They still understand that China is still far from the position to dislodge the U.S. from top dog position. So Xi Jinping came to office, has continued try to build a good relationship with the U.S. It is from that perspective he proposed the so-called concept of new model of great power relationship. But new model is not new at all. Why not new? In the 4 aspects, it's not new. First, when you talk to the model, he talked about 3 points. One is no conflict, no confrontation. Second, mutual respect each other's interests, especially China's core interests. Third is win-win situation. That's what they talked, the 3 aspects. But U.S. interpret that as China as a rising power will not challenge American dominant position in exchange. U.S. would accept China's rising power status. That's what both sides. When you see it, yes, they made very good points on that aspect. So from that aspect, I say it's not new at all. First, this kind of power transition has taken place in the world, notably between U.S. and UK. Second, this type of so-called new power relationship has been defined mostly in a traditional China peaceful coexistence concept. China has talked about coexistence a lot. That peaceful coexistence has been expressed in different terms. The harmony of the world, despite of ideological differences, political differences, let's work together. So it's another word for those kind of peaceful coexistence. Third, this new power relationship is still defined in the traditional realist tradition. Term, material power, mostly. Japan, Germany, and other powers, we also in the Chronicle yesterday, we talk about that, of great power relationships. But they are not a level of US and China. Because of US-China is the two largest economies in the world. So in fact, the day before, a few days ago, in the US, we had China Town Hall meeting. Albright had that presentation. I noticed she never used the term new model of great power relationship. She used the term new model of US-China relationship, bilateral relationship. Because these two powers are the most powerful, materially powerful nations. So it's still traditional realist term. Fourth, the US has proposed that too in the past. Just in the Obama administration, Jim Steinberg, for example, talked about strategic reassurance, which is another term for the new model of great power relationship. US will accept China's as a rising power, even peer power. The China assured the US' rise will not be at expense of interests of other powers. Very similar, very similar. So it's not new at all. But it does reflect the goodwill or good intention of the Chinese leaders. That's what I see it. And I think American leaders see it too. That's why American mainstream scholars and the US government officials have happily accept that concept at this time. Go to Washington, talk to people. They all say, it's good, but so what? That's the problem, so what? They accept that. That's American policy, long-term policy to integrate China into the established international system. New model. So the problem is that US and China, as the two largest economies, two largest powers, their relationship has always been characterized by the friction, by conflicts, by competition, for sure. One issue at point is the US strategic rebalance toward the Pacific. US has not criticism of that. My colleague, Christopher Hill, is my current dean. He just wrote an article talking about unintended consequences of that. Very critical. A lot of people critical that very much, for sure, because it caused a lot of problems. On the China side, it's also critical of that too. China has a lot of concerns about the strategic rebalance because it sees as US come to China's backyard, try to cultivate some of the China's enemies or quasi-enemies, or some people are not happy with China. Then build an encirclement or containment of China. That's a lot of people. Yes, Wang Jisi talked that, and a lot of articles have discussed about that encirclement, containment. That concern is not totally groundless, for sure. Right. It's indeed, US, some people have tried to do that. And also China is a major factor in the US strategic rebalance because a lot of China's neighbors have been calling Uncle Sam coming back. We have a problem with China to counterbalance China's bullying, China's behavior in the last 2 years, 3 years. Although before those 3 years, China had a good neighboring policy, China's relationship with those neighbors was pretty good. But in the last few years, China got problems with those neighbors. Those neighbors, talking to people in Washington, a lot of people will tell you, 3 years ago, when they talked to Vietnamese, say, you have border disputes with China, do you want Uncle Sam to help you? This country will say, no, we have good relationship with China. Your Uncle Sam came in, the issue will become complicated. We don't need your help us. Now everybody from Washington come to Asia. every of their allies, partners, even those not partners will come to US, please stay here. Please to build a counterbalance to China. So from that perspective, China's concern is not groundless. Who is responsible for that? Both China, the neighbors, for sure. Of course, some people also blame US. This kind of strategic rebalance, many people see that as mostly a military redeployment. Indeed, 2,500 Marines partners in Darfur, Southern Australia. So what? 1,000 miles away from South China Sea. But that's the place. And a few small ships in the Singapore, 50-50 deployment Pacific, and Atlantic is redeployed 60-40%. You can give a lot of examples to see China is to be content by the US so-called strategic rebalance. Especially, some people even blame US behind Japan, behind the Vietnam, behind the Philippines in their claims of territories in disputes with China. So China is concerned. US is also concerned with all those kind of disputes and also instability in this area. Now, the third question, I try to move very quickly. That's caused conflicts, that caused frictions. Then, is US in a position to contain China? A lot of people in the US are talking about that. Some people really want to contain China, but it's not what you want, it's what you can. I don't think the US is in a position to contain China at this time for the following 4 regions. First, talking about containment. What is containment? The US containment of the Soviet Union is to keep minimum contacts with the Russians. That's containment. Can US do the same thing to China? Not at all. Really, the quote Kissinger said, at that time, the Soviet Union was militarily powerful, military economic very weak. But China is so different. China is the second largest economy in the world. It's the largest trade partner of every major country in the world. Even between US and China, the interdependence is so clear. And the US trade and China last year was $536 billion. At the height of US, the Soviet trade was only $4 billion. So that's a very big difference. I'll move quickly. Second, no country in the Asia Pacific is willing to live on the shadow of China. But none of them is also willing to make China enemy or make a choice between China and the United States, for sure. Third, US itself is in big trouble today. If US want to compete in the world, in the Asia Pacific, it has to make its own house in order. It has not. The shutdown made President Obama's absence in the 3 major regional summits, APEC, East Asian Summit, and US-ASEAN Summit. That really made US credibility in question. Fourth, talking about focusing on Asia Pacific, US still sucked back to Middle East, to Europe. That's so-called unintended consequences. Those countries complain, the US, you're not paying attention to Europe, you're not paying attention to Middle East. John Kerry came to office, he said, I'm not comfortable with the pivot. So there's a rebalance the rebalance. That's what's going on in the US. So it's not possible. Finally, let me move to the fourth. Because US cannot contain China. So the realist way for US-China to work in the Asia-Pacific is to build a balance of power. Both countries have to find a realist way to engage each other. From the US side, US has to accept China's rise power position. Try to let China play more leadership role, take more responsibility with all the rights China has entitled. Some people in the US are not comfortable with that, for sure. US for two walls in the Pacific. How could we let China to take over those? Not people have that problem, but that's what the tragedy of great power rivalry. You know that's tragedy for both rising power and established power. US is not able, in not position to do that. And I move very quickly, I meet all those other things.
Last sentence.
Okay, from China's side, also China has to come to reality. Can you China drive US out of Pacific? Maybe in the long run, not today. Not today. Second, China has benefited from the international order, regional order. The US established under US leadership. Stability, economic prosperity, the CNN, security, everything. So it's in China's interest also to work with the US. China, the biggest problem of China is not the US, it's domestic problem. No other power could subvert China, only China can subvert China itself. So in that way, in conclusion, I will say these two powers have a lot of convergence of interests. Let me quote Secretary Clinton to conclude my remarks. She had a very good, I like that. US and China work together cannot resolve all the problems in the world. Without US and China, none of our global problems could be resolved. A thriving China is good for the US. A thriving US good for China. Thank you.